The espresso machine in Suite 1200 chose the worst possible moment to die. It didn't just stop working. It made a sound, somewhere between a wheeze and a cough, and then released a thin ribbon of steam that curled toward the ceiling like it was trying to escape, which, Tessa Aldridge thought, was honestly a reasonable instinct given the circumstances. She stood in the doorway of what she had assumed was the hotel's maintenance access room, holding a toolbox in one hand and a work order crumpled in the other. The work order said Room 1200. It said espresso unit malfunction. It said urgent. What it did not say was that Room 1200 was not a room at all. It was the private boardroom of Callaway Grand Hotel's 42nd floor executive suite, and it was currently occupied by 8 people in suits that cost more than Tessa's monthly rent, all of whom had just turned to look at her. The man at the head of the table looked up last. He had the kind of face that didn't waste expressions. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, the particular stillness of someone who had learned very early that the room would always wait for him. His name, Tessa would find out later, was Bennett Hale, CEO of Hale Consolidated, worth somewhere north of $3 billion, depending on which magazine you asked. At that moment, he was looking at Tessa the way someone looks at a word they don't recognize in a language they thought they spoke fluently. "I think," Tessa said. "I have the wrong floor." Nobody moved. The espresso machine wheezed again, a small, sad sound, like it was agreeing with her. "The machine," said the woman to Bennett's left, sharp bob, reading glasses, the energy of someone who had not slept in 36 hours and was not interested in starting now, "has been making that noise for 40 minutes. We've been waiting." Tessa looked at the machine. The machine looked back at her, or at least it felt that way. "Okay," she said, and she walked in. She told herself later that she didn't know why she did it. She'd been looking for the maintenance corridor on 12, had taken the service elevator to the wrong floor, had followed the number on the door without checking the building map. Simple mistake, easily corrected. She could have said sorry, turned around, called it in. Instead, she set her toolbox on the floor beside the credenza, crouched down, and opened the access panel on the back of the machine. The room was very quiet. "You're the technician," Bennett said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite a statement either. It was the verbal equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Tessa Aldridge," she said, without looking up. "Hotel facilities. The work order said urgent." "It did," said the woman with the bob. "That was my request." "Christine," said Bennett, not sharply, but with the particular tone of someone filing information away. Tessa found the problem in about 45 seconds. The heating element had shorted. Not a catastrophic failure, just a clogged valve that had caused a pressure buildup. She'd seen it a dozen times. She had the part in her kit. She fixed it in 4 minutes. She stood up, closed the panel, ran a test cycle. The machine hummed back to life quietly and without drama, and produced a small stream of perfect espresso into the cup she'd positioned beneath the spout. "Good as new," she said. She picked up her toolbox. She looked at the door, and then she noticed the spreadsheet. It was projected on the screen at the far end of the room, a budget projection, quarter over quarter, with a column of figures running down the right side. Tessa was not an accountant. She had never worked in finance. She had a certificate in HVAC systems and a second one in commercial appliance repair, and she had been fixing things in hotels for 6 years. But she had also grown up in a house where her father balanced the books for a small construction company at the kitchen table every Sunday night, and she had sat beside him often enough that certain patterns had become instinctive. The way a column of numbers had a rhythm to it. The way something off in the sequence registered not as a thought exactly, but as a feeling, like a note played slightly flat. The third quarter figure was wrong, not wildly wrong, not the kind of wrong that jumps out, the kind of wrong that hides in a long column of nearly right numbers and weights. Tessa looked at the door again. She looked at the screen. "That number," she said. She pointed. She had not planned to say it. The words came out before she'd made any decision to speak. "The Q3 capital expenditure. It's pulling from the wrong baseline." Silence. Bennett Hale turned to look at the screen. Then he turned to look at her. "Excuse me?" Tessa felt the specific discomfort of a person who has just said something in a room where they have no business saying anything. She was aware of her work uniform, the name patch on her chest, the toolbox in her hand. 8 faces, all pointed at her, ranging in expression from confused to offended to, in the case of a younger man near the end of the table, quietly curious. "The baseline year," she said. She committed to it. "It's listed as fiscal 2021 in the header, but the figure itself is calculated off 2019 numbers. There was an adjustment in Q1 of 2022 that doesn't appear to have carried through. If you're using this to project Q4 allocations, the downstream variance is going to look smaller than it actually is." The woman with the bob, Christine, had gone very still. Bennett stood up. He walked to the screen. He stood in front of it for a long moment. "Marcus," he said quietly. The young man at the end of the table, the curious one, was already pulling up something on his laptop. His fingers moved fast. The room was silent except for the sound of keys. "She's right," Marcus said. He said it like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. The 2022 adjustment didn't carry through the linked cells. It's been pulling from the archived baseline the whole time. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. "How large is the variance?" Bennett asked. Marcus typed. Looked at the screen. Looked at Bennett. "Across all affected projections, somewhere between $18 and $22 million in understated exposure." Nobody spoke. Tessa picked up her toolbox again. "I'll leave you to it," she said. "Wait." She stopped. Bennett Hale was looking at her with the same expression he'd had when she first walked in. Unreadable, precise, like he was solving a problem and she was a variable he hadn't accounted for. He studied her for a moment in a way that might have been rude if it hadn't been so genuinely focused. "How did you see that?" he asked. "My dad did bookkeeping," she said. "Numbers off rhythm stand out to me. It's not a skill, it's just pattern recognition, I guess." "Sit down," he said. "I'm sorry. The presentation continues after this. There are 3 more projection sets we haven't reviewed." He pulled out the chair nearest to him, the chair that had clearly been empty, not occupied, and set it to one side of the table. "Sit down. Look at the numbers. Tell me if anything else sounds flat." Tessa Aldridge stood in the doorway of the most expensive boardroom she had ever been in, holding a toolbox, wearing a uniform with her name stitched in blue thread over the left pocket. She sat down. She told herself it was because she didn't want to be rude. But the truth was simpler than that. She wanted to see the rest of the numbers. She stayed for 2 hours. She didn't speak much. She watched the presentations and listened, and twice more caught something. Once a rounding methodology that compounded inconsistency over multiple quarters. Once a data entry that had transposed 2 digits in a way that only became obvious when you tracked the figure back to its source. Both times she said so. Both times Marcus confirmed it. Bennett didn't thank her during the meeting. He didn't make any particular fuss about it. He just absorbed the information and moved on, the way someone does when they're used to things working correctly and have made a quiet decision that this is now one of those things. When the meeting ended and the other attendees filed out, Christine paused beside Tessa's chair. "You saved us a significant problem," she said. She had the manner of someone who did not say things like that easily. "I just saw it," Tessa said. "Seeing it," Christine said, "was the entire job." She left. Tessa stood up, gathered her toolbox. She was nearly at the door when Bennett spoke. "Aldridge." She turned. He was still at the head of the table, reviewing something on his laptop. He hadn't looked up. "I'll need you in the meeting tomorrow morning," he said. 9 o'clock, same room." Tessa opened her mouth. "I'll clear it with your department," he said before she could say anything. He did look up then. "Unless you have an objection." Tessa thought about the supply closet inventory she was supposed to audit tomorrow. The HVAC service call in the conference wing at 10. "No objection," she said. She didn't know why she said that either. The next morning, she found out that Bennett Hale was the most precisely structured human being she had ever encountered. He arrived at 8:57, not 9. 8:57, which meant he had built a 3-minute buffer into his schedule. The coffee was already on the table. The projector was already running. When the other attendees arrived at 9 on the dot, everything was already in motion, and the meeting began at exactly 9 o'clock with no preamble, no small talk, no waiting. He had a system for everything. Agenda items were timed to the minute. Interruptions were absorbed without disrupting the flow. He had a way of parking a tangent with a brief noted and returning to it at the precise moment it became relevant again. The meeting ran 59 minutes and ended with a summary of every decision made and every action item assigned. Tessa had never seen anything like it. "You're staring," said the young man. Marcus Webb, she'd learned, who had settled into the chair beside her with the comfortable ease of someone who had adopted her as an ally. "Is he always like this?" she asked. "Since day one." Marcus lowered his voice. He once rescheduled a call because the original time had been set for 10 past the hour instead of 10 on the hour. He said it bothered him, that it was 10 past, that someone had chosen 10 past when 10 on the hour was available. Tessa looked at Bennett. He was writing something on a notepad, actual paper, actual pen, in perfectly even letters, and the precise regularity of his handwriting was visible from across the table. "Interesting," she said. She meant it. She found it genuinely, inexplicably interesting, in the way she'd always been interested in systems that worked. The internals of a machine, the logic of a circuit, The reason that one adjustment upstream changed everything downstream. Bennett Hale ran himself like a machine. She wanted to understand the schematic. Over the next 3 days, that was what she did. She attended the morning meetings, reviewed the projections, flagged 2 more anomalies, one significant, one minor but potentially compounding, and spent the rest of her regular hours doing her actual job, replacing a heating element in a restaurant kitchen, diagnosing a persistent fault in the elevator sensor array, training a new hire on the commercial refrigeration units in sub-basement 2. Her supervisor, a patient man named Roy who had worked in hotel facilities for 23 years, had agreed to the arrangement with the particular diplomacy of someone who understood that when a billionaire's people make a request, you find a way to accommodate it. "Just don't let the 9th floor HVAC go another day," Roy had said. "It won't," she'd promised. It didn't. On the 4th day, Bennett found her in the utility corridor on 11. He was not a man who appeared in utility corridors. He was a man who appeared in boardrooms and lobbies and, presumably, other places that had been appropriately prepared for his arrival. The corridor was lit by fluorescent strips, one of which was flickering, and there were pipe access panels stacked against the wall, and Tessa was lying on her back on a drop cloth examining the underside of a ventilation duct. She heard footsteps and assumed it was Roy. "The flow rate on duct 7 is fine," she said, without looking up. "The noise is a loose damper plate. I'll have it done in 20 minutes. "That's good to know," said Bennett Hale. Tessa sat up fast. She hit her shoulder on the duct. She said a word that she did not typically say in front of CEOs. Bennett looked at her. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Now," she gestured at the corridor, the drop cloth, the toolbox, the general situation. "You have 20 minutes, he said. She stared at him. "You timed it." She lay back down. "Ask." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him choosing the words. "The variance in the Q3 projections," he said. "Our team ran the files twice before that meeting. Both times it was flagged as clean." "I know," she said. She reached up into the duct housing, found the damper plate. It rattled loosely against the bracket. The flag was probably checking for out-of-range values. The figure was in range. It just wasn't connected to the right source. "Our system is designed to catch connection errors. Then someone set the tolerance too wide." She found the screw. It was stripped. She'd need a different bit. You can set a system to flag anything outside of a 10% deviation. But if the wrong baseline is off by 8%, it'll pass every time. Silence. "That's an oversight in our audit protocol," he said. "That's what I'd guess, yeah." She switched bits. "You don't need me to fix your audit protocol. You need whoever built it to rebuild the tolerance thresholds. I can tell you what to look for, but the fix is above my pay grade. I'm not asking you to fix it." He paused. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to sit in on the protocol review next week, as an outside perspective." Tessa stopped. "Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "I repair appliances." "You also," he said, "caught what 2 dedicated reviews missed. Twice more since then." "Pattern recognition," she said again. "I keep telling you. It's a skill," he said, "whether you frame it that way or not." She thought about that. She looked up at the duct housing. She thought about her father at the kitchen table on Sunday nights, the green-shaded lamp, the ledger books. The way he would sometimes go very still for a moment and then flip back 3 pages and tap a number with his finger and say, "There, that's where it went." She had never thought of that as a skill. It had just been Sundays. It had just been watching. "One meeting," she said. "One meeting," he agreed. She tightened the damper plate. The rattle stopped. 22 minutes had passed. The protocol review was not 1 meeting. It was, in the end, 4, spread across 2 weeks alongside her regular schedule, fitted in around service calls and maintenance rounds, and one particularly memorable afternoon when she had to leave early because the compressor in the hotel's main kitchen had developed a fault that was going to take down dinner service for 400 guests if she didn't get to it in the next 90 minutes. She got to it in 73. She came back to the last protocol session with compressor grease on her forearm that she hadn't noticed until she sat down and caught Marcus's expression. "Don't," she said. "I didn't say anything," he said. "You were about to." "I was going to say," he said quietly, "that you have something on your—" "I know." Bennett at the head of the table had not reacted. He hadn't looked up from his notes, but Tessa, who had spent 2 weeks studying the way he moved and didn't move, noticed that he had paused, just briefly. The way someone pauses when they've registered something and are choosing not to show it. She noticed. She filed it away. She didn't know what to do with it. That was the thing about Bennett Hale. He was the most legible and illegible person she had ever met at the same time. His systems were transparent. She understood now exactly how he worked, what he needed, how he thought about problems. But the person inside the system was harder to reach. He was careful in a way that went beyond professionalism. He was careful the way a structure is careful when it's been built to bear load, and has been bearing load for a long time, and has become uncertain about what would happen if it set the weight down. She thought about that more than she meant to. On the last day of the protocol review, after the rest of the team had filed out, she stayed to update the tolerance documentation she'd been drafting. The room was quiet. Bennett was at his end of the table, working. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up. He waited. "The 3-minute buffer," she said. "You always arrive 3 minutes early." Why 3? He considered this. She half expected him not to answer. 2 feels rushed, he said. 4 is inefficient. 3 is enough time to confirm the setup without creating dead time. So you've calculated the optimal buffer window. Yes, for arriving at meetings, for arriving at any scheduled event. He said it without any apparent awareness that this was unusual. The same logic applies to phone calls, flight departures, scheduled deliveries. Tessa looked at him. "Does it ever get exhausting?" she asked. Not unkindly, genuinely. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said then. Sometimes it was the first time she had heard him say something that wasn't a complete answer. She recognized it as such, and she didn't push on it, because she had learned enough about how he was built to understand that the admission had cost him something, and that pressing would make him rebuild the wall immediately, and she didn't want that. "I'm the opposite," she said. "I've been 12 minutes late to every shift I've worked for the last 6 years. My supervisor has given up telling me. How do you compensate?" "I stay late," she said. "I finish everything. Nothing falls through." He looked at her for a long moment. "Different systems," he said. "Same objective, yeah," she said. "Exactly." The audit review presentation was scheduled for the last Friday of the month, in front of Hale Consolidated's full executive committee. It was Bennett's event. Tessa had been asked to present the section on tolerance threshold methodology, the piece she had identified and helped reconstruct. She had never presented to an executive committee in her life. She told Marcus this the morning before while they were setting up the room. "You'll be fine," he said. "I fix espresso machines," she said. "You fixed a $20 million error," he said, in a room full of people who were supposed to catch it. "That was an accident, Tessa." He set down the stack of handouts he was holding. "You have spent the last 3 weeks in sessions with some of the sharpest financial minds in this company, and you have been right every single time. It was not an accident. It was you." She looked at the floor. "Bennett doesn't ask people to sit in on protocol reviews," Marcus said quietly. "In 6 years I have never seen him do that. He asked you." She didn't say anything. "That also," Marcus said, "was not an accident. The presentation went well." That was the plain truth of it, and Tessa was not going to pretend otherwise. She had prepared carefully, written her notes longhand, the way her father used to, practiced the language until it didn't sound like she was reciting it, timed the section to 4 minutes, and 30 seconds because Bennett had told the committee's attention was most consistent in segments under 5 minutes, and she had filed that away without meaning to. When she stood up and walked to the front of the room, there was a moment, brief, quiet, where she was aware of exactly who she was and exactly where she was, and the distance between those two things. She was wearing the only blazer she owned, a navy one she'd bought for her cousin's wedding 3 years ago. She had a hotel ID badge clipped to the pocket because she'd forgotten to take it off, and she only noticed it when she was already standing at the front of the room. She left it on. It felt right somehow, like a statement she hadn't planned to make. She presented the methodology. She explained the baseline error, the tolerance gap, the reconstruction process. She answered 3 questions, 2 from committee members she didn't know, 1 from Christine, who asked the hardest one and nodded slightly when Tessa answered it. When she sat back down, Marcus pressed his foot briefly against hers under the table. She didn't look at him. Bennett presented the next section. He didn't look at her either. But at the end of the meeting, when the committee chair, a gray-haired woman named Patricia, who had the manner of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by very little, thanked the team, she looked at Tessa specifically. "Aldridge," she said. "Where have you been hiding?" 11 floors down, Tessa said. "Mostly in the utility corridors." Patricia laughed. The room laughed. Even Christine smiled. Bennett did not smile. But he was looking at Tessa with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something that had moved, slightly, from the precise neutrality he maintained as a default. She couldn't name it exactly. It was the look of someone who had expected to find a fixed point and had found instead that the point had expanded. After the committee cleared the room, she found herself alone at the table again with Bennett. This was, she realized, becoming a pattern of its own. She was putting her notes into her bag. He was standing at the window. It was late afternoon, and the city below was doing what cities do, moving, insisting on itself, completely indifferent to the 42nd floor. Patricia wants to bring you on as a consultant, he said, for the Q1 review cycle. Tessa stopped. She's not the only one, he said. She looked at his back. He was still facing the window. I have a job, she said. I know, I like my job. I know that too. He turned around. He had the carefully composed expression he wore when he was about to say something he had measured. This would be an addition, not a replacement, if you wanted it. She looked at him. You know that's not what I'm asking about, she said. A pause. No, he said, I know it isn't. The city moved 37 floors below them. The espresso machine, a new one installed the previous week, sat quietly in the corner. I don't know how to do this, he said. He said it with the same precision he brought to everything else, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd fumbled it. I'm better at systems than at this. I'm aware of that. I know, she said. I've noticed. I'm also aware, he said, that you noticed. She almost smiled. 3-minute buffers. Yes. Something shifted in his face. Not the ghost of a smile this time, the actual thing. It was brief and a little uneven, and it changed his face entirely, and she understood immediately that he did not show it often, and that made it mean more than it would have otherwise. 3-minute buffers. She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood beside him, not quite touching, and looked at the city. I found a connection error, she said. You know that. That's all I did. That's not all you did. She was quiet. You stayed, he said, when you could have walked out. Every time you could have walked out, and every time you didn't. You kept pulling me back in. You kept letting me. She thought about that. She thought about the utility corridor and the drop cloth and his footsteps that she'd mistaken for Roy's. She thought about Sundays at the kitchen table, the numbers and their rhythms, the thing her father had taught her without knowing he was teaching her anything. She thought about the fact that she had walked into the wrong room and found, of all things, this. One condition, she said. He waited. I keep my job, she said. I'm not giving up my job. Understood. Roy needs to be informed and consulted, not just accommodated. Agreed. And if I tell you something sounds flat, you listen, even if your own team has cleared it. He looked at her. That was never in question. She turned to face him. He was close enough that she could see that the perfectly composed exterior had something underneath it that was not composed at all. Something that had been waiting, she thought, for longer than just the past 3 weeks. Okay, she said. Okay, she said again. And then, because she was Tessa Aldridge and she had never been able to leave a thing alone once she'd found the loose part. For the record, though, your baseline methodology was the problem. Not just the tolerance settings. You were measuring the right thing. You were just measuring it from the wrong starting point. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. I was. The espresso machine in the corner hummed softly to itself. Outside, the city moved on, unconcerned, as cities always are.